Chapter 48. Shuyi stared at Shi Yan motionlessly, trying to recall, was that, a long, long time ago? She rolled her eyes and said to herself, could it be when I was in college? It couldn't be earlier, I came to Jiangqing when I was in college. Shi Yan raised the back of his hand towards her. Shuyi came back to his senses. Why? Go back. Shi Yan rolled up the car window, with a rushing expression. Shuyi pressed the car window and asked, tell me, I can't remember. Hearing the phrase I can't remember, Shi Yan felt that it was a joke for him to mention this matter at this time. He opened Shuy's fingers one by one. If you can't remember it, don't think about it. Although Shi Yan didn't seem to want to continue this topic anymore, Shuyi took this question with him all the way back home, sitting by the bed and thinking about it for a long time. If she had seen Shi Yan before, she thought she would definitely remember it deeply. But when Shi Yan didn't want to tell her, she didn't have the ability to pry his mouth open. Shuyi fell on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The three-petal crystal lamp shone bright beams of light, and fine dust danced inside. She looked at it, the corners of her mouth suddenly bent, then she turned over and briskly walked into the kitchen. Although Shuyi has all the equipment in the kitchen, she seldom cooks for herself. There are only instant foods in the refrigerator, and the rice bags in the locker are unopened. For some reason, after returning from the hospital, Shuyi felt as if her illness had suddenly recovered. I don't know when the body temperature dropped, and the body became lighter. I even ate a bowl of porridge without any seasoning with relish. After the meal, Shuyi walked around the living room, and even felt that he could go to work. But, she sat on the couch and stretched her legs, feeling tired for the first time. I just want to lie down at home and let my mind go, as if I can live up to the fresh air after the rain today. When it was almost 5 o'clock, Qin Shiyue sent a message, are you feeling better? Shuyi turned over and returned Qin Shiyue's message with her legs crossed. Shuyi, I'm fine. Shuyi, thank you today. Qin Shiyue, huh? Qin Shiyue, thank me for what? Shuyi, nothing, just thank you for your concern. Qin Shiyue, you are too polite, so what are you doing now? Shuyi, nothing to do, rest for a while. Qin Shiyue, then when will you help me? Shuyi suddenly remembered what she said, and immediately went to the friend list to find Yu. When she swiped her finger down, something suddenly flashed through her mind, and she froze. Oh, a few days ago, she thought that she and Shi Yan would never have anything to do in this lifetime, so she deleted him. So this is what he reminded in the car today, right? No, definitely not. He had to take the initiative to send her a message to find out that it was deleted. And if he really found out, how could he bring it up to her so calmly? Shuyi comforted herself while biting her fingertips guiltily. Shuyi, you first give me your little uncle's WeChat. Qin Shiyue, don't you have one? Shuyi, oh, I deleted it by mistake. Qin Shiyue, sis, I'm not a 3-year-old child anymore, I wouldn't believe such words, smile. Qin Shiyue, how much do you have to drink to delete such a person by mistake? Shuyi, don't ask. Qin Shiyue obediently pushed Shi Yan's business card over without asking any further questions. Since unilaterally deleting friends, there is no need to reapply for verification. After Shuyi clicked Add to Contacts, Shi Yan returned to her friend list. Everything looks the same as before except that there is no chat history. Looking at the blank screen, Shuyi felt uncomfortable like scratching his heart. After thinking for a long time, Shuyi carefully poked an emoji over. Shuyi, in a daze.gif. She didn't expect that Shi Yan would come back so quickly. But it was his usual indifferent style. Shi Yan, very free. Shuyi, I'm not idle, I'm seriously thinking about something and I want to ask you. Shi Yan, say. She was holding the mobile phone, like a junior high school girl in love, with a shallow arc on the corner of her mouth, typing word by word. Shuyi, what is your ideal girlfriend like? She wasn't asking the question seriously. Shuyi knew that he liked her a little bit. But while waiting for the reply, she still had some expectations. After several minutes, there was movement on the other side. Time banquet, quiet. Shuyi, time banquet, seriously. Shuyi, time banquet, seriously. Shuyi. A few seconds later, Shuyi typed expressionlessly. Shuyi, a senior reporter for Kaijing Weekly, has a quiet personality, a serious job, and a serious writing style. Shuyi, I think your ideal type is me. Shi Yan, really? Shuyi didn't understand what his sudden yin and yang strangeness meant. Immediately afterwards, Shi Yan sent a screenshot. Shuyi does not have chat records, but he does. The first one is a screenshot of Shuyi posting 5 emoticons in a row. In the second screenshot, Shuyi, Mo Wenwei's cloudy day, Jay Chow's sunny day, and Stephanie Sun's rainy day are not as good as you chatting with me. In the third screenshot, Shuyi, do you like drinking water? Shi Yan, okay. Shuyi, then you already like 70% of me. In the fourth screenshot, Shuyi, can you play the violin? Shi Yan, no. Shuyi, then how did you touch my heartstrings? Time banquet. In the fifth picture, Shuyi, oh my god, it felt like an earthquake just now, did you feel it? Time banquet. Shuyi, oh, so it wasn't an earthquake, it was my heart beating when I thought of you. Shi Yan, shut up. In the sixth screenshot, Shuyi, I found that you were almost perfect, and there is only one shortcoming. Time banquet. Shuyi, flaw me. Shi Yan, Shuyi, go to the hospital to see her brain. Seeing these screenshots sent one by one, Shuyi almost couldn't breathe. Tianling Gai has become so numb that it looks like thousands of ants are crawling, and the toes are almost digging out a set of 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms on the ground. There was not much contact in the past month, and Shi Yan fell apart for a while. She fell into an extremely heavy mood, and almost forgot the previous way of getting along. She used to, was talking like that. Internet gossip is harmful. Shuyi, stop it. Shuyi, stop posting. It's a pity that Shi Yan pretended not to see her, and kept sending screenshots one after another. He doesn't need to search for these contents deliberately, just flip through them casually. Until a dozen more screenshots were sent. Shuyi couldn't take it anymore. Shuyi, TD. The banquet finally stopped. Shi Yan, huh. Shuyi, if you continue to post, tomorrow you will see the news that a young beauty fell to her death. Shi Yan, don't you see how quiet, serious you are? Shuyi. She collapsed on the sofa and buried her face in the pillow, not wanting to look at her phone again. I can't talk anymore today. After waiting for Shuyi's reply for a long time, Shi Yan knew that she shrank from being teased. He smiled, obviously very busy, but he also sent a few boring words. What are you doing? As soon as it was sent out, Chen Xing walked into the office and pointed out to Shi Yan. Shi Yan immediately put down his phone and walked towards the conference room. The number of users of Mingyu Yunchuang has surged recently, and the original data center can no longer bear the rapid growth of business, but the independent expansion of IDC requires high construction and operation and maintenance costs. After deliberation by various managements, it was agreed that the best solution in this period is to directly cooperate with professional companies to directly build the most advanced cloud service platform. Mingyu Yunchuang's project is naturally a big cake, and various financial solution companies are vying to compete first. This week, the 3 companies that competed to the end presented their solutions respectively. As of today, representatives from the last company are in place. In the conference room, on the U-shaped table are printed demonstration files in sequence, and a visual concept display interface has appeared on the projection screen. Yu Xingzhou stood in front of the computer, doing final adjustments. His hands trembled a little. Brother Hong. Yu Xingzhou glanced at the Mingyu staff in the conference room and said, I can't speak well. Be confident. The person called Brother Hong is Yu Xingzhou's leader, patted him on the shoulder, and said, you are the backbone of this project. You have been preparing for so long, how could you not speak well? Don't be too nervous. It's strange that Yu Xingzhou can calm down. Qin Leji was also the reason why he took the initiative to squeeze into this project. At that time, he was gearing up to show his strength in front of little uncle. But who would have thought that things would turn out like this? At the beginning, I tried my best to fight for the project, but now I just want to be a deserter. Before Yu Xingzhou could say anything, the door of the meeting room suddenly opened. Yu Xingzhou subconsciously turned his head to look over. Shi Yan came at a leisurely pace, followed by several men and women in formal attire. The meeting room suddenly fell silent. However, Yu Xingzhou felt that the surrounding air was squeezing towards him. However, Shi Yan didn't look sideways, and walked straight to the front of the U-shaped table. When he sat down, his eyes swept over Yu Xingzhou, and he didn't even stop there for a moment. It was as if he had never seen this person before. This was originally the best scene Yu Xingzhou could have hoped for, but for some reason, he felt a sense of contempt of being stepped into the dust instead. Since Shi Yan came in, the employees who were originally arranged in the conference room all retreated, and the next one was Yu Xingzhou's home court. Shi Yan leaned against the back of the chair and focused on the person in front of the projection screen. Even under normal circumstances, his gaze is intimidating, not to mention Yu Xingzhou has ghosts in his heart. In less than 20 minutes, beads of sweat dripping from the corners of his forehead were already glowing under the lamp. However, the content that was already proficient in the heart, but kept stuttering and making mistakes. Even the little boy who was in charge of managing the audiovisual equipment couldn't help frowning. As for the others, they all turned their heads to see Shi Yan's reaction. And he didn't seem as angry as they thought. He just looked at Yu Xingzhou calmly, his thoughts seemed to wander to other places. That is, as the saying goes, mind wandering. It was the first time everyone saw Shi Yan distracted on such an occasion. I don't know if it is Yu Xingzhou's luck or misfortune. A few minutes later, when Yu Xingzhou gave the wrong data for the third time, there was a sound of a pen being placed on the table from below. The voice was very soft, but the faces of everyone present changed. Like a frightened bird, Yu Xingzhou suddenly became speechless and looked at Shi Yan nervously. Under his gaze, Shi Yan closed the document in front of him, got up and walked out. At this moment, he didn't even leave a word. The others also got up tacitly, and followed him out of the conference room as they had come. The sound of chairs being pushed away was swallowed up by the carpet, and the conference room was as quiet as if the mute button had been pressed. Yu Xingzhou watched helplessly as Mingyu Yunchuang's people walked out of the meeting room one by one in an orderly manner. They didn't say anything, and they didn't show any expressions of disappointment. But this invisible humiliation made him 1,000 times more uncomfortable than accusing him face to face. When Shi Yan returned to the office, the emotion on his face showed a little. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, not knowing whether to laugh or get angry for a moment. Today, when Yu Xingzhou made frequent mistakes, he thought of the scene when he and Shuyi met for the first time. Shi Yan was ashamed to admit it, but he had to admit that he had ever felt jealous towards such a man. He couldn't remember the exact time of day. It was just an ordinary day. The Jiangqing Convention and Exhibition Center is holding the 4th Financial News Awards ceremony, and one of the organizers is the capital company newly established by his friend. Shi Yan happened to be free that day, so on a whim, he found an inconspicuous corner and sat down. Applause kicked off the curtain of the awards ceremony. Under the spotlight, the host's voice was dignified and clear, and he read out the names of the winners of the Best Feature of the Year Figure Award. An article, Zhu Xingguo's currency war, hit the pain points of the market with its precision, and made the words Shuyi appear in the ears of colleagues quickly and frequently. Anyone who has read this article will be deeply impressed by its sharp and warm writing style. Shi Yan was no exception, so when the host read out the name, he subconsciously raised his head. The moment Shuyi got up, the shutters of the 4 camera positions came one after another, chasing after each other, vying to capture this emerging figure. And Shi Yan himself didn't even notice that his eyes followed Shuyi to the stage. She was a little nervous, but also dignified, and finished her acceptance speech in an orderly manner. Just like her article, a few testimonials are interspersed with practical facts in the industry, which is logical and fascinating. The people in the audience couldn't help laughing. Shi Yan took the time to loosen the Windsor knot at the neckline. When she bowed, she saw her thick eyelashes fluttering. His eyes flickered at the same moment. After the awards ceremony, people came up to say hello one after another. Shi Yan couldn't leave, but from the corner of his eyes, he saw Shuyi was also surrounded by the other side. When he finally got away, he scanned the hall, but only saw that beautiful figure at the gate. He hardly thought about it, and stepped forward to chase it out. However, the moment he walked out of the gate, he saw Shuyi holding a man's arm affectionately, walking towards the parking lot with a smile. An indescribable emotion filled Shi Yan's heart. He kept walking, but his expression had returned to normal. When passing by those two people, he heard the woman say delicately, "Of course I miss you, don't you miss me?" "Oh, then I don't miss you either." Shi Yan chuckled lightly. The surface is dignified, but the reality is contrived and pompous. That's all. Shi Yan was too lazy to reminisce about the past. He sat behind his desk, picked up his phone, opened WeChat, and saw that Shuyi had replied to his message more than 20 minutes ago. It was a voice message. He asked what she was doing. But she replied, "I'm thinking of you." After listening to this voice, Shi Yan quickly threw the phone back on the table. It was dusk outside the window, and the warm wind was blowing in the room. He felt a burning pain on his face. Chapter 49. When sending the phrase "I'm thinking of you" to Shi Yan, Shuyi was in a bit of a broken state of mind. Anyway, after being bombarded with screenshots of his chat records for so long, Shuyi felt that there was no need for him to struggle anymore. And she felt that she was telling the truth just now, and she didn't deliberately act. She was thinking of him. But Shi Yan didn't reply to the news for a long time. So even though she was seeking truth from facts, Shi Yan was still embarrassed. Well, Shuyi curled up on the sofa and sighed, not knowing what to do. Shuyi, who hadn't waited for a response for a long time, began to urge Shuyi again. Shuyi, did you ask? Shuyi, ask him if he is free tomorrow. Only then did Shuyi remember that he had forgotten about Shuyi. Shuyi, okay, let me ask now. Shuyi, but why ask him out tomorrow? Shuyi, look at the painting exhibition. Shuyi, I asked my friend to help me get 3 tickets. Shuyi majored in art appreciation at university. Although she hadn't attended many classes and almost couldn't even finish the course, she felt that for a layman like you, her little superficial ability to deal with the teacher was enough. At least it can bluff people and make you feel that she is an artistic person. Shuyi approached you. Are you free tomorrow? After waiting for a long time, you didn't respond to any message, so he was probably really busy. Shuyi was not in a hurry, but Shuyi, who was holding the phone, was a little nervous. So much so that she didn't notice her mother talking to her. Song Leland reached out and knocked on her phone. Are you going to fall into the phone? Huh? Shuyi looked up. What? I'm asking you. Song Leland said while stirring the spoon, your dad is going to climb the mountain tomorrow. Do you want to follow along, exercise more? You see you are sitting or lying down every day, keep in good shape relying on a diet, how can this work? I won't go. Shuyi said, who wants to go mountain climbing with their old men? What old men are not old men? Speak well and don't have any rules. Song Leland was a little angry when she heard it, but she wouldn't get angry over such a trivial matter, and Jiang Heng and his group of children. I won't go. Shuyi still insisted, I have something to do tomorrow. Shi Yan on the side put down his chopsticks, wiped his hands slowly with a towel. His tone was flat, but with a bit of irony. What can you do? The usual Shuyi was used to his tone, so she couldn't refute, and didn't dare to say anything more. But today, she was eager to move, so she couldn't control her mouth much. Why can't I have something to do? I have an appointment to see the art exhibition. Shi Yan smiled, but his tone was still not so friendly. Really, who can't find anything to do, and actually accompany you to see the art exhibition? But Shuyi felt that he might be in a good mood today, and he actually told her so much about everything. But it is impossible for her to tell Shi Yan that she is going to chase a man. Sister Shuyi. Shuyi stared at him deliberately, raised her chin slightly, showing off, can't you? Shi Yan really ignored her. In the next second, Shuyi received Shuyi's reply, which was her chat record with you. Tomorrow. Something is wrong, what's the matter? Shuyi, oh, it's nothing serious, it's just the weekend. My friend has 3 tickets for the art exhibition, and there's only one person missing. Let's see if you're free. I'm sorry. Shuyi, it's okay, it's okay. Shuyi looked at it, her brows and eyes drooped, and the smug look just now disappeared in an instant. Shuyi, oh, that's it. Shuyi, then you ask the day after tomorrow. Shuyi frowned, a little confused. It's okay to follow up and ask, but she's afraid that you might think she has other meanings. Although she had clearly stated that she had no intention of going on a blind date when they were chatting before, it was easy for 2 opposite sexes who had no contact with each other to suddenly insist on inviting someone to see the art exhibition, which could easily make people fantasize. Shuyi, do you have to go with me? Shuyi, how about that? If I invite people alone, they will definitely think that I am too unreserved. Shuyi, then you are not very reserved now. She thought about it, whatever, just treat it as doing good things for Shi Yan. So Shuyi asked you again. Shuyi, do you have time the day after tomorrow? You can do it the day after tomorrow. Shuyi, okay, then see you at the Convention and Exhibition Center at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Good. Upon receiving this news, Shuyu's mood turned around. After eating 2 mouthfuls of food, she said with a smile, I'd better go hiking with my dad tomorrow. Shi Yan leaned back on the chair slowly, and looked at her with folded arms. Aren't you going to see the art exhibition with your sister, Shuyi? I'm not going. Shuyi shook her head in a small arc, with a faint smile on her lips. I decided to go the day after tomorrow, and I'll go climbing tomorrow. I haven't seen Jiangheng for a long time. I don't know if he's growing up again. Handsome. In the twilight, the fragrance of the newly bloomed crabapple flowers in the yard was brought in by the wind, filling the tip of the nose, soothing people without knowing it. The phone on the table vibrated suddenly. Shi Yan picked up the phone and glanced at it. Shuyi, are you free tomorrow afternoon? Want to go to the movies? Shuyi, well-behaved. Gif. Shi Yan pursed her lips tightly and replied, no, work. Just after Shuyi let her go, she came to ask him out. Are you really using him as a spare tire? By the way, Shi Yan glanced sideways at Shuyi, who was buried in his meal. It's still Shuyu's spare tire. He got up suddenly and knocked Shuyu's head with his mobile phone gently. What are you doing? Shuyi covered her head, and when she turned her head, she could only see Shi Yan's back. She was very angry, but she only dared to whisper, did I provoke him when I was eating? Really? Mom, just take care of him. Song Leland shrugged, who dares to control him? On the other side, Shuyi, who received Shi Yan's reply, was full of expectations, but failed. Workaholic, have a great spring and work overtime. She was typing while eating dinner. Shuyi, then I will come too. Shi Yan, what are you doing here? Shuyi, to earn performance. For a long time. Shi Yan, as you like. This is allowed. Shuyi smiled and finished the rest of the meal, humming while washing the dishes. When picking up Bai Ruoshan's phone call, her tone was very frivolous. What are you doing, miss me? Speak well, what are you talking about? Bai Ruoshan felt goosebumps all over her body. Let me ask you, is Shuyi, who was in the class next door to us, an internet celebrity now? That's right. Shuyi asked, it's quite popular. I saw 2 million followers on Weibo the other day. Bai Ruoshan, then can you still contact her? Our company recently has a product to promote, and she is quite suitable. Okay, no problem, I'll find someone to ask for you. Bai Ruoshan frowned on the other end of the phone. Shuyi, what's the matter with you today? Are you sick? You are sick. Shuyi snorted, I am in a good mood. Hearing this, Bai Ruoshan was actually happy. She had been worried that Shuyi was in a bad mood during this time, and she was afraid that her body would not be able to bear it. But Shuyi's tone was so embarrassing, Bai Ruoshan couldn't help but want to hurt her. Hey, I know that you are in a good mood, but I don't know that I thought you won 5 million. Shuyi paused for a moment, then smiled and said, that's more than 5 million. Huh, Bai Ruoshan was aroused by her interest. What? It's nothing. Shuyi said casually, just me and Shi Yan should be reconciled. It seemed a bit too reckless to say so. Shuyi added, anyway, he is not angry now. Not angry anymore. Bai Ruoshan screamed, and Shuyi was so frightened that he almost smashed the bowl in his hand. What are you so excited about? It's not that Bai Ruoshan was excited, it's just that in her perception, any man would be furious when encountering such a thing. What's more, for a person like Shi Yan, it's tantamount to stomping on his face and self-esteem 200 times and throwing him into the crematorium to be burned 800 times. So when Bai Ruoshan heard that Shuyi had overturned her car, she had already lit a sea of candles for her sisters in her heart. However, this is how long. At that time, he was not angry anymore. Is this the magic of beauty? Can even this be forgiven? Bai Ruoshan touched her face, completely puzzled. Shuyi babbled about the past few days in her ear, so Bai Ruoshan felt that her 3 views were shattered in just a few seconds, and now they are slowly reorganizing in a strange way. So, Shuyi said slowly, I will work overtime with him tomorrow. Fine, Bai Ruoshan has accepted this reality, but still can't help reminding, then you don't have to do this. How many times have I told you, you have to be more reserved, otherwise men won't cherish you. Holding the hot water, Shuyi swallowed the pills in one gulp, and then said word by word, what time is it? You are still talking about those formulas and theorems. I will do whatever I want, express what I want to express, otherwise no one will know if the opportunity suddenly disappears. And, a piece of medicine was stuck in his throat, and a bitter taste spread out. Is it true that you will be cherished if you are reserved? I was reserved enough when you Xingzhou chased me before, and the result. This sentence stopped Bai Ruoshan from asking, and she couldn't refute at all. If a man doesn't cherish me because I'm not reserved enough, because I took the initiative first, then Shuyi sighed, then I have nothing to say. The next afternoon, Shuyi didn't bring anything, and went to the Mingyu headquarters building with ease. In this office building with strict access control, Shuyi went up to the 17th floor unimpeded for the first time. When walking into Shi Yan's office, he sat behind the computer and didn't lift his eyes until Shuyi walked in front of him. Shuyi stood in front of him. I'm coming. Shi Yan clearly saw and heard it, but just ignored her. Shuyi went around to his side again, stretched out his hand and waved in front of his eyes. Am I invisible? Shi Yan took off his glasses, looked up at her, and then raised his chin sideways. Shuyi looked over. There is a sofa. Go and sit over there. How come this sentence sounds like which side is cool? Stay there. Shuyi let out an "oh" and went where she was supposed to go. The moment he turned around, Shi Yan looked at her aggrieved back, and raised the corner of his mouth. Once the door of the office was closed, all sounds from the outside world were cut off. Shi Yan stared at the computer screen intently, and there was no sound at all. If he hadn't seen this living person with his own eyes, Shuyi would have thought that there was no living thing in this office other than her. She was sitting upright at first, but after a long time, and she had nothing to do, she felt that her waist was not her waist, and her back was not her back. Anyway, Shi Yan wouldn't distract her a little bit, so Shuyi slowly leaned into the sofa. After a while, there was still no movement from Shi Yan. Shuyi began to try to attract his attention. For a while, I went to the window to touch the green plants, and then I went back to the sofa to watch my mobile phone, and occasionally ran to the opposite corner to stretch. That figure dangled back and forth in Shi Yan's peripheral vision without stopping. When Shuyi touched the leaves of the green plants for the third time, the people behind him finally moved. Shuyi immediately turned around, but found that Shi Yan's attention was not on her, but lowered his head and dialed the company's internal line. The moment the phone was connected, he raised his eyes and met Shuyi's eyes, then looked at her, and explained to the person on the phone word by word, order 2 movie tickets. On the other end of the phone, the secretary asked, do you want to reserve the room? Shuyi looked at her and bent his lips. Shi Yan withdrew his gaze, no need. Secretary, need me to send you the list of films that are currently being screened? Shi Yan, no, you can pick whatever you want. When Shi Yan raised his eyes again, Shuyi had already run to the side of the sofa to pack his things. He watched her every move, and added, it needs to be in the most recent time period. Secretary, okay, I will send the message to your mobile phone later. After hanging up the phone, Shuyi had already packed her things, sat on the sofa in a well-mannered manner, and watched Shi Yan. Shi Yan also looked at her. His eyes were calm, but as if he was seeing Shuyi for the first time, he looked at her carefully. After a while, he even bent his arms to support his temples, and his eyes moved inch by inch on Shuyi's face. Shuyi didn't know what he was thinking, but felt that his eyes seemed to be looking at a fat pig that was slaughtered, and he was inexplicably frightened. Are you still watching the movie? What's the rush? Let's see you first. Shi Yan still stared at her directly, his eyes moved down little by little, swept over her waist, her legs, and finally fixed on her eyes. I'm in no rush. Shuyi recited silently in his heart. After a few seconds, she finally couldn't take it anymore and covered her hot face with her hands. What are you looking at me for? Shi Yan got up suddenly, walked in front of her, squatted halfway, and pulled her hand away. Shuyi had no choice but to meet his gaze again. Shi Yan took a close look at it for a while before hooking the corners of his lips. See if this movie is worth 2 hours of my time. Shuyi. Regardless of whether Shi Yan thought it was worth it or not, he brought Shuyi to the cinema anyway. Valentine's Day has just passed, and it coincides with the weekend, and the movie theater is still crowded. But Shi Yan's secretary booked the VIP hall, and the two of them went there at the right time, so they entered the theater directly without waiting. Just at the entrance, Shuyi heard someone calling Shi Yan. Mr. Shi. Shuyi looked back before Shi Yan. I saw 2 women walking in together. One of them was well dressed, with long hair and shawls. Although she didn't wear much makeup, her aura still made everyone around her stand out. It's just that after Shi Yan turned her head, this beauty's gaze stayed on Shuyi. After a few seconds, she withdrew her gaze and looked at Shi Yan again. I'm Fiona from EM Finance, remember? I met you last time at EM Charity Night. Upon hearing the name Fiona, Shuyi's nerves were lifted suddenly. She remembered that this was the name of the woman Guanji had mentioned on the phone. Then she finally understood why Fiona stared at her as soon as she came over. Thinking of this, Shuyi felt a sense of crisis, and calmly, the banquet was getting closer. This kind of silent oath of sovereignty, how could Fiona not understand the meaning? While looking at Shi Yan, she stretched out her hand towards him, while paying attention to Shuyi without any trace. Shi Yan was unaware of Shuyi's secret contest, and spoke to Fiona in a serious manner. Haven't seen you for a long time. Yeah, I didn't expect to meet you here, Fiona said, reaching out to Shi Yan. The moment she saw them shaking hands, Shuyi gritted her teeth. Although they only held hands for a few seconds, Shuyi felt as if they had been sticky for several minutes, wishing to step forward and break them apart. Putting her hand away, Fiona wanted to say something, but at this moment, the lights in the theater suddenly went out. Let's go. Shi Yan pulled Shuyi inside. The movie is about to start. Fiona glanced at the two of them, and followed her friend towards the seat. Coincidentally, their seats are in the front and back rows, respectively. But the VIP seat is an adjustable seat with a wide space between the front and rear, so Shuyi can only feel the faint line of sight behind him, but not his movements. Shuyi was fidgeting throughout the whole process, not paying attention to the big screen at all. The only impression of this movie was the title Flowers and Full Moon. On the contrary, Shi Yan at the side seemed to be taking it very seriously. Shuyi couldn't calm down, and after many thoughts flashed through his mind, he suddenly asked, "What do you want to drink?" There is a retractable table between the two seats, with a QR code on it. You can order by scanning it, and a special person will deliver the items. Shi Yan stared at the screen intently. Don't drink. Shuyi, then do you want popcorn? Shi Yan, don't eat. Boring. Shuyi ordered a bucket of popcorn for herself. She didn't want to go to the bathroom halfway, so she didn't order a drink. After a while, someone came in with a cat on his waist. Shuyi was eating popcorn, but his attention was still on Fiona behind him. Even if it's just her intuition, she can be sure that Fiona is not watching a movie, but watching a banquet. Suddenly, Shuyi felt the person behind her stand up, and her movements of chewing popcorn suddenly froze, mobilizing all the nerves in her body, and she remained motionless. We ordered mineral water. Fiona reached out and patted Shi Yan's shoulder. Do you want it? Shuyi bit the popcorn hard, forcing himself not to look over there. To pretend to be calm and breezy. No need. Shi Yan's voice sounded beside her ear. Thank you. Shuyi breathed a sigh of relief. But the sense of crisis in her heart became more and more intense, like a cat scratching. If she didn't do something, she couldn't settle down. A few minutes later, Shuyi suddenly handed the popcorn to Shi Yan. Do you want to eat? Shi Yan didn't even look at her. Don't eat. Shuyi felt that Fiona was looking at them. Wouldn't it be a joke to be rejected like this? So Shuyi simply squeezed out a popcorn and handed it to Shi Yan. Eat one, it's very sweet. Shi Yan looked sideways at her. The dim lights in the theater still couldn't hide Shuyi's contrived begging expression. Eat, she frowned, as if she didn't eat the banquet, she would cry on the spot. The picture on the big screen changed frame by frame, causing the light and shadow between the two to flicker. Shi Yan stretched his neck forward suddenly, then lowered his head. In the dark, Shuyi saw him staring at her closely, but took away the popcorn with Shuyi's fingers. It seemed that his lips had reached her fingertips. The warm feeling was on the verge of breaking out, and with the speed of blood flow, it spread to Shuyi's whole body. She froze for a while, then turned around quickly, looking at the screen squarely. He didn't know where to put his hands. He randomly grabbed a few popcorns and stuffed them into his mouth. The moment she bit her fingertip, she froze again. Then, like a thief, he quickly lowered his hand and stroked his fingertips lightly. After a long time, Shuyi didn't speak again. Just when Shi Yan thought that Shuyi had finally settled down, he saw her turn around slowly, and said to Fiona behind her, "We ordered popcorn, do you want it?" Fiona, who had witnessed everything just now, was so annoyed by Shuyi's contrived and refreshing bitch that she wanted to laugh. No, thank you.
Welcome to Storyverse. If you have any novels you'd like to see or stories you'd like to share, feel free to leave us a comment or send us a private message. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our community of avid readers and romance enthusiasts.
Chapter 50. After this battle, Shuyi was finally able to watch movies wholeheartedly. But at this time the movie was halfway through. Shuyi started to watch it at this time, and some couldn't connect with the plot. She leaned against Shi Yan and asked, "Is the hero and heroine still together?" Shi Yan looked at the screen and said calmly, "This is not the leading actor." "Ah, really or not?" Shuyi didn't even bother to eat popcorn. Isn't the name of this movie Flowers and Full Moon? Who is the heroine hugging with? And at present, this man has the most roles in the movie. If he is not the leading actor, who is? However, in the last 20 minutes, the director speeded up the progress. In 10 scenes, the ex-boyfriend gave up the heroine for his career, and then the heroine immediately fell into the arms of other men. The audience was stunned for a moment, and even forgot to scold their mothers. Seeing that the progress bar couldn't hold it anymore, Shuyi couldn't help but start thinking, just co-authoring the male lead for the last 20 minutes of the scene. Shi Yan turned his head, glanced at her lightly, and said nothing. In the end, the heroine delivered the invitation to the man she had loved for many years, and when he shook his hands in anger and violently destroyed all the hundreds of thousands of lines of code written, Shuyi hugged the popcorn and was shocked by the plot. I forgot to blink my eyes. Is this heroine so cruel? Suddenly, Shi Yan's voice rang in my ears. It's quite ruthless to send invitations at a critical period of his career rise. Shuyi nodded. Shi Yan, you should take it easy. Shuyi, yes. Shi Yan, invite him when the moon is full. Shuyi. She stuffed 2 popcorns into her mouth and closed her mouth obediently. How does it feel? Shi Yan was pointing fingers at Sang and scolding Hui just now. The more Shuyi thought about it, the more he felt that Shi Yan had this meaning, so when the movie ended, he suddenly said, but I think that women will not be stable if they are not ruthless. She got up with Shi Yan and followed him out, really. As soon as the words fell, Shuyi didn't know what he stepped on, and suddenly sprained. In the blink of an eye, Shi Yan grabbed her to support her. Shuyi. When her eyes met, she had a premonition that Shi Yan might be getting weird again. But Shi Yan just looked at her like this, suddenly smiled, then let go, turned and walked towards the exit. Baffling, Shuyi walked out holding the popcorn she hadn't finished eating. The audience in the entire theater poured out at the same time, and amidst the clamor of voices, 80% of them were insulting this god-turning plot. Who would have thought that such a beautiful name would turn out to be such a plot? Shuyi didn't understand why Shi Yan's secretary chose such a film, and whether he had been oppressed by Shi Yan for a long time and was looking for an opportunity to take revenge on him. The secretary is also innocent. She was thinking about the schedule of Valentine's Day. The releases are all beautiful romance movies, and there are many people in the circle of friends who recommend it, saying, everyone must bring your lover on Valentine's Day. I recommend it. After passing the bathroom, many people were photographed inside. Although Shuyi didn't drink any water, he wanted to go in and fix his makeup. So she stuffed popcorn to Shi Yan. Get it for me, I'm going to the bathroom. The moment he turned around, Shi Yan saw a shiny thing slipping from Shuyi's neck. However, the person has already trotted towards the bathroom. Shi Yan squatted down and picked up the necklace. When Fiona and her friends came out, they saw Shi Yan standing by the window of the elevator. He was alone, but in his hand was half a bucket of popcorn that belonged to the girls. This seems out of place, but it seems to be human nature. Fiona said hello to her friend, and then went straight to Shi Yan. Mr. Shi Yan looked over and nodded slightly. Fiona leaned against the window, looked around, and said to herself, I heard from Guanji that you have a niece who is only a few years younger than you. She observed Shi Yan's expression, and covered up the temptation in her words with an extremely relaxed tone. Is that your niece just now? She is very beautiful. She's not my niece. When Shi Yan said this, there was no emotion and no warmth. The corners of Fiona's mouth curled up slightly. However, when she was about to continue talking, Shi Yan added another sentence, but it's really pretty. Fiona pursed her lips, adjusted her emotions with lowered eyes, and said with a smile, by the way, I have made a reservation for dinner, do you want to go together? No. Shi Yan raised his head and looked over Fiona's head, she is more shy. When the voice fell, Fiona seemed to hear Shuyi's voice. When she turned around, she saw Shuyi and a middle-aged couple walking side by side, chatting enthusiastically at the same time. Shuyi, that's right, this movie is simply deceiving. It's released on Valentine's Day. The director is taking revenge on society, right? Woman, you don't know, I've read gossip, it seems that this is a sweet Valentine's Day file. But the male lead seems to offend the investor when the filming is almost finished, and then suddenly becomes the second male. Shuyi, can it still be like this? Fiona. What a shy woman. The driver is waiting downstairs in the cinema. Seeing Shi Yan and Shuyi coming out, she immediately got down to help them open the car door. However, just as Shi Yan was about to get into the car, he felt that the people behind him were silent. He turned his head and saw Shuyi standing still, holding her half bucket of baby popcorn, with her toes on the ground, trying to put on a bashful look. The weather is fine today. Shi Yan didn't take back the legs that had already stepped into the car. What do you want to do? Shuyi, I don't want to take a car, why don't you walk with me for a while? In the evening when it cleared up after the rain, the sun shines brightly, and the sky is full of strange lights and dazzling colors, which are cast on pedestrians in the distance, but they are as gentle as warm yellow tulle. Shi Yan looked at Shuyi with a difficult expression. Shuyi said confidently, we all watched a movie together, what's the matter with going for a walk together? We need a full set of services. Serve. Shi Yan raised his eyebrows slightly, and put his hands on the car door, but he didn't intend to come over. I serve you. Shuyi felt that he really seemed a little out of control. It doesn't mean that. Who is earning performance? Shi Yan finally came over. Me. Shuyi. Get in the car, get in the car. She waved her hands and walked forward. Anyway, I don't really want to walk in high heels. When she passed by Shi Yan, she was dragged back by him. Just standing still, Shi Yan stared at her for a moment, then passed his hands through her hair, along her neck to the back. The sudden closeness at this moment made Shuyi's heart beat violently. Almost like a reflexive reaction, she immediately held her breath and closed her eyes. But I was thinking in my heart, did the scene just now be beautiful to him? But, it's not good to kiss like this in such a large crowd. There are many elementary school students on the side of the road. If they are seen, they will lead to bad children. There are so many elderly aunts and uncles walking, they will feel hot eyes. Well, sometimes men can't help but be aggressive, which is really worrying. Shuyi prepared herself psychologically for kissing in public, but she didn't wait for a long time for the kiss to fall. Instead, the hair on the back of his neck was brushed by Shi Yan, and then he let go of his hand and looked down at Shuyi. What are you doing? Shuyi opened his eyes suddenly, saw Shi Yan's serious expression, and at the same time felt something cold on his neck. She froze the corners of her mouth and smiled. It's nothing, just take a breath of the fresh air after the rain. Shi Yan obviously didn't believe her nonsense, bent down and got closer. Think I'm going to kiss you? He came out of the office today, dressed in a serious manner, but his tone was very frivolous. Shuyi stiffened her neck, thinking that she was no longer a serious person in Shi Yan's eyes anyway, so she said confidently, yeah, what's wrong? Shi Yan's eyes didn't move, but his tone suddenly became a little cold. I don't have the habit of kissing in public. He stared straight at Shuyi. The thoughts that made him irritated were rampaging silently. Why, did you often do this with that ex-boyfriend before? However, Shuyi didn't grasp what Shi Yan wanted to express. She suddenly smiled, and her eyes lit up. Isn't it just enough for the public? Time banquet. The jealousy that was full of her was suddenly crushed in the chest by her smile, and it was difficult to gather again. But Shi Yan was not so reconciled. It's just that he doesn't even have the qualifications to have an attack. He can only let it become an indescribable emotion. The shadows of the trees are mottled, making the smile on the corner of Shi Yan's mouth faint. Then you didn't get in the car with me just now. Shuyi, alas. You said it earlier. She smiled and grabbed Shi Yan's arm, making a gesture to walk into the car. It's just that her movements were very light, and she didn't exert any force at all. She was gently pulled by Shi Yan, and she returned to the original place. Shi Yan, be quiet. Shuyi politely withdrew his hands. Of course she didn't take Shi Yan's words seriously, she wasn't stupid enough for that. It was dusk, and the noisy streets were bustling with each other. Shi Yan held the half bucket of popcorn in his hand, making his body look a little more smoky. He followed Shuyi's footsteps and walked extremely slowly, stepping on the stone road step by step, slowing down the passage of time a bit. Are you going to see the art exhibition with Shuyi tomorrow? He opened his mouth abruptly, and Shuyi said and ask me, what do you want to do, want to go together? Shi Yan ignored her, and said to himself, you don't look like someone who likes art. Shuyi suddenly interrupted him, why do I look different? Do I look vulgar? Is it tasteless? Shi Yan looked sideways at Shuyi speechlessly. She still refused to let her go. You have to tell me something today, what do you mean? However, Shi Yan still didn't answer her words. Although Shuyi is studying art appreciation, I know how much ink she has in her stomach. So he paused, his voice casual, but the meaning in his words was obvious. What do you two want to do secretly? Shuyi felt a little guilty when he asked him. You can't tell him directly that your niece is chasing a man. Why can't this man, Shi Yan, be a little more nervous? Why can he even guess this kind of thing? Then you can ask your niece yourself. Shuyi's voice was much softer, revealing his lack of confidence everywhere. I don't have her to get close to you. Shi Yan said softly, you still have a secret. Shuyi was silent for a while, and suddenly didn't want to hide it from him, so she said, actually, Xiaoya wants to meet a friend of mine, so she asked me to help make an appointment. Huh, Shi Yan asked casually, which friend? One, just. Shuyi's face was tangled, and he didn't know how to tell him. A blind acquaintance. Sensing her hesitation, Shi Yan looked down at her. A man. Shuyi. She nodded. Shi Yan raised his eyes, his expression gradually became serious. Which friend did you go on a blind date with? Shuyi. What kind of blind date? Shuyi said, don't be so vulgar. Shi Yan seemed to be amused by her, nodded his head, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Well, I'm tacky. Shuyi glanced at him, feeling a little unhappy. He muttered again, still stingy. I'm stingy. Shi Yan stopped suddenly, looked at Shuyi. The words were already in his throat, but he was not willing to say them. If he is stingy, can she stand in front of him now? If it were another friend by his side, such as Guanji, such a good-tempered man, if a woman who came out of nowhere used him as a tool to get revenge on his ex-boyfriend, he might not do anything cruel, but it is certain that there will be no contact between old age and death. Shi Yan just looked at Shuyi seriously. Seeing that Shuyi was terrified, he quickly changed his words. No, you are the most angry. So do you want to go together tomorrow? Shi Yan, no. Shuyi, won't you go and see what the man your niece likes is like? Shi Yan resumed his slow pace, and said unhurriedly, the man you seem to be dating, how bad is it? Shuyi was delighted by what he said, and wanted to roll her eyes a little bit. How can you beat around the bush while boasting? Wait a minute. When did I see him? Shi Yan smiled and said nothing. Shuyi didn't bother with him anymore, and tugged at his sleeve. How much older than you, do you mind? What do I mind? Shi Yan raised his eyebrows. Isn't 10 years older than me also my junior? Shuyi. It makes sense. Fortunately, Shi Yan really didn't plan to go, otherwise Qin Shiriwa might be so angry that he would take the time machine back to the first month to get his hair cut. It's rare for her to get up early in the morning, and the beautician will come to make her face and hairstyle. She has been busy for a while. If the time banquet comes, wouldn't it limit her performance 100%? Maybe you could still think that there is something wrong with her. It was a sunny day, and the temperature rose sharply. Pedestrians took off their winter clothes one after another and changed into light clothes. Some girls even couldn't resist wearing short skirts with bare legs. When Qin Shiriwa and Shuyi arrived at the exhibition center, Yu was already waiting at the door. Because it was the weekend, he dressed casually, wearing only a thin gray sweater, and was looking at the introduction on the display board at the door. Among the passing crowd, he bowed his back slightly, and his concentrated expression added a sense of alienation to him, standing out among the crowd of passers-by. Qin Shiriwa glanced at it from a distance, pulled Shuyi's sleeve, and said with a smile, look, the academic temperament is different. It's so gentle, it's not like my uncle. Qin Shiriwa felt that Shuyi gave her a cool look. She coughed and changed her words. It's not like my uncle, that kind of full bloom of morality, intelligence, body, and beauty. Look at what you said. Shuyi patted her on the shoulder. He can't hear you even if you praise him to the sky here. When she walked over with Qin Shiriwa, the sound of footsteps caught Yu's attention. He turned his head and smiled at the two of them. Come. Have you been waiting long? Shuyi asked. Yu, just arrived. Yeah, that's good. Shuyi pointed to Qin Shiriwa. This is my friend Qin Shiriwa, who I just met the day before yesterday. Qin Shiriwa immediately waved to Yu. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Hello. Yu glanced at his watch, raised his chin towards the two of them. Go in. He walked ahead, and the two women were 2 steps behind him, giving them room to whisper. For a while, remember to leave room for me to play. Qin Shiriwa said in a breathy voice, I'm a professional. No, Shuyi gestured to seal his mouth with a zipper. In the next half an hour, Shuyi could barely speak without speaking. Even if Qin Shiriwa handed her the topic, she would just say I'm an amateur and I don't understand to fool her. A very dedicated female supporting role. Today, the exhibition center held the impression of Monet's art exhibition. The core selling point is the multimedia holographic projection technology, which displays nearly 400 works of Monet after digital reproduction in the form of streaming real-time images. Since Monet is one of the most important painters in France and a representative of Impressionism, many people know this name well even if they don't understand paintings. As soon as they heard about such a fresh art exhibition, they went there one after another, trying to leave artistic traces on Weibo in their circle of friends. Therefore, even though the entire art exhibition is divided into 8 themed pavilions, the venue is still overcrowded, and it is not at all the cold and aggressive style that Shuyi imagined. There are even a lot of people who bring their families with them to play, as if watching a 4D movie, and the sound of children jumping queue can be heard everywhere. Fortunately, Monet is a master of Impressionism. Although Shuyi cannot appreciate its artistic value, just looking at these natural colors is also pleasing to the eye. On the other side, Shuyi eloquently explained these famous paintings to Yu. Shuyi listened to the color scale, brushstroke, and Impressionism, and was a little impressed by Shuyi. I didn't expect that there is still a little ink in my stomach when I usually only know how to eat and drink. When the three of them turned to the Monet's light-themed pavilion, Shuyi leaned into her ear and said, "Yes, I can't see that you really have a bit of artistic accomplishment. You can do anything." Shuyi covered her mouth and said, "Last night, I read Baidu Encyclopedia for a while, before going to bed. I made up my mind. I don't even know what I'm talking about." Shuyi, seeing her shocked look, Shuyi comforted him, "Anyway, he's just like you, it's fine to be fooled." Shuyi, it seems quite reasonable. For example, at this moment, the way Shuyi pointed at the world-famous sunrise impression and talked eloquently, in Shuy's view, really looked like that. And you listened carefully, never interrupting her, and responded to her from time to time. For some reason, Shuyi suddenly felt a little pitiful for Yu, who was just being fooled. Now he may think that he has gained a lot of knowledge. Shuyi smiled helplessly, greeted the two of them, and walked towards the bathroom. The women's toilets in public places are always overcrowded. Shuyi suddenly received a call from Wang Meru while queuing. She just called to chat. When Shuyi heard her talking about the trivial matters of life, her thoughts naturally turned to that side, so some distant memories in her mind were suddenly brought back to life. She froze for a moment, hurriedly found an excuse and hung up the phone, then opened Baidu and searched for the encyclopedia entry of the Dean of Qingyan University's Academy of Fine Arts. Then send the screenshot to Shuyi. After a while, Shuyi, who is this? Shuyi, Yu's mother. Shuyi began to feel sorry for Shuyi now. When she returned to the exhibition hall, Shuyi had already finished her explaining and followed Yu toward the studio expressionlessly. Shuyi followed their footsteps, leaned close to Shuyi, and comforted her in a low voice. "It's okay, even though his mother is the dean of the Academy of Fine Arts, it doesn't mean he knows art." Shuyi looked at her pitifully, and said with her mouth, "Are you comforting me?" "No." Shuyi held her hand as a sign of encouragement. "Look at your father and your uncle are both engaged in finance, don't you know nothing about it?" Shuyi, "Thank you, I have been comforted. One part of the exhibition is to play Monet's life documentary. Maybe many people's intuitive impression of documentaries is boring, so there are few people in the theater. Facts have proved that the public's choice is correct." Even though the pictures were beautiful and the music was sweet, Shuyi couldn't open his eyes for a few times due to the flat rhythm and the hypnotic sound next to him. Shuyi was naturally not much better. She was sitting between Shuyi and Yu, with her arms folded in front of her chest, leaning on the back chair. She looked like she was watching a documentary seriously, but in fact she almost lost consciousness several times. Halfway through the film, there were only the three of them left in the theater. Shuyi quietly glanced at Yu, and began to make calculations in her heart. There is a mother of the Dean of the Academy of Fine Arts, who must have grown up under the influence of art. Especially for a world-famous master like Monet, he must know his works very well. Even so, he didn't dismantle her nonsense, and accompanied her to watch such a boring documentary where he knew all about the plot. That should. Shuyi thought that you must have a good impression of her. Thinking of this, Shuyi snickered for a moment, completely losing sleepiness. But gradually she leaned towards him, pretending to be about to fall asleep. Unexpectedly, just as her head was about to touch Yu's shoulder, he suddenly dodged to the side. The movements are natural, but no flaws can be seen, as if it is really just sitting in a different posture. Thus, Shuyi almost bumped his head on the seat. She froze in this movement, her eyes widening. Fuck, the subtle movements here did not attract Shuyi's attention. Yu turned his head to the side, looked at Shuyi, and said softly, "What's wrong? Are you sleepy?" It took Shuyi a while to come back to her senses. "Oh, yes, I'm a little sleepy." Yu, then take you home. Are you leaving? When Shuyi was dragged up by Shuyi, his mind was full of fog. "How long have you been here?" Shuyi smiled dryly at her. "I'm sleepy and want to go home and sleep." Shuyi, Before Shuyi could find a chance to explain to her, when the three walked out of the exhibition center, they bumped into Shi Yan head-on. Shuyi, aren't you not coming?" Shuyi was very surprised. Isn't it impossible to say, why did someone suddenly appear? When Shuyi saw Shi Yan, she suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. Moreover, Shi Yan took an undisguised look at Yu, with an imperceptible sense of arrogance in his eyes. "Who is this?" Yu met Shi Yan's eyes, but asked Shuyi. When Shi Yan watched this scene, his eyes unconsciously changed slightly. But before Shuyi could speak, Shuyi rushed to answer, "He is Sister Shuyi's boyfriend." Shuyi. The words had already been let out, facing Shuyi's and Shi Yan's gazes at the same time. Shuyi bit the bullet and continued, "I'm here to pick up Miss Shuyi." She simply felt that Shi Yan didn't seem to have any kindness towards Yu, so she subconsciously wanted to separate the relationship. As for the end, let's talk about it later. Because of Shuyui's actions, only Shuyi followed Shi Yan into the car in the end. Shi Yan unbuttoned the bottom button of his suit, loosened his tie at the same time, and asked coolly, "Are you having fun?" Shuyi, "It's okay, it's very interesting, it's the first time I've seen a light painting, it's quite fresh." After the words fell, Shuyi suddenly felt that the atmosphere in the car was a bit subtle. In addition, after knowing it, I realized that it seemed that the moment Shi Yan appeared, he was a little hostile towards Yu. She turned her head to look at Shi Yan, and moved towards him little by little. "You don't think he's interested in me, do you?" Shi Yan turned his head and looked directly at Shuyi. "I think men all over the world are interested in you." Obviously an aggressive sentence. Shuyi listened, but felt a little tempted. The corners of her mouth slowly curled up, and just as she was about to speak, Fan Lei, the driver in the front row, suddenly stepped on the brake. Then, Fan Lei's voice slowly came from inside the car. "I definitely haven't." Chapter 51. The good atmosphere was distracted by the driver, and Shuyi glared at the driver angrily and amusedly. And Shi Yan also had a serious expression on his face, and the emotional look just now disappeared instantly. Shuyi sighed, his thoughts turned back and forth, the words he wanted to say lost momentum, and in the end it turned into a dull sentence, "If you think so, I can't help it." But as soon as he finished speaking, Shuyi was taken aback for a moment. "Why does my tone sound like a scumbag?" And Shi Yan seemed like an unreasonable and jealous, resentful woman. Once accepting this setting, Shuyi's head was full of pictures, immersed in his imagination, he couldn't help laughing. And he didn't realize how strange his current appearance was at all. For a moment, Shi Yan looked at Shuyi's sad and smiling look, and felt that her IQ might be on par with her age. "Why are you laughing?" "Nothing." Shuyi pressed the corner of his mouth, but couldn't get into the show, and was still immersed in the script of a scumbag man complaining about a woman. He couldn't help adding, "Anyway, he and I are just ordinary friends." Shi Yan, ordinary friends have dinner together on Valentine's Day. Shuyi. It turned out that his hostility towards you came from here. She blinked, "How do you know?" Shi Yan leaned on the car window with his elbows bent, taking the time to look at Shuyi. "If you want people not to know, unless you don't do it yourself." Originally, Shuyi was an upright and honest gentleman, but he felt a little guilty when he said it with such righteousness. "It's as if we were dating on Valentine's Day. It's just that we met each other when we went to apply for a visa that day. We lined up all afternoon and had dinner together when we came out. I didn't even remember that it was Valentine's Day." Shi Yan's expression suddenly became serious. "What visa?" Shuyi looked at Shi Yan as if he was a little nervous, deliberately curled the corners of his mouth, and said with a pitiful look, "America, my heart was broken for a few days, and I plan to leave this heartbroken place and go to the United States to start a new life." After hearing the words, the nervous look on Shi Yan's face had long since disappeared, replaced by an imperceptible boredom. "What are you going to do? How long will you stay?" "Immigrant." Shuyi poked his shoulder with his index finger. I said I want to immigrate, are you listening to me? Shi Yan sneered, with a cool expression on his face. That look seemed to say, are you willing? Shuyi, boring, she lowered her head, pinched a strand of hair, and said casually, a business trip, an interview assignment, but I went there, and I will collect some materials, by the way. It will take 7, 80, or 90 days. Shi Yan asked, when are we going? Shuyi thought for a while, took out her mobile phone to read the feedback from the agency that helped her with the visa application before, and read word by word, the current process is very smooth, if there is no accident, the visa will be issued in 2 weeks, and you can go gone. Are you going alone? He asks. That's right, otherwise, you think I'm going out like you to make such a big fight. Shuyi was still looking at the feedback information on the phone. After saying this, she looked up and saw Shi Yan looking at her softly. After a while, he whispered, send me the hotel and flight information. The corners of Shuyi's lips curled up, he pursed his lips, smiled coyly for a long while, and then muttered in a low voice, it's affectionate to ask for warmth. Time banquet. When he looked away, Shuyi immediately suppressed his smile, stopped joking with him, and said seriously, you also went to the United States, if we meet at that time, there may be someone to take care of him. Before Shi Yan could speak, she crossed her arms and made an X and said, you and I are ordinary friends, even more ordinary than Mandarin. Instead of imagining what I have with him here, you might as well worry about Qin Shiriwa, she is the one who is ready to move. I don't have that much imagination. Shi Yan looked sideways out of the window, and said flatly, I'm not that idle either. After finishing speaking, Shuyi suddenly approached Shi Yan and asked, are you just ignoring your niece? Just when Shi Yan's cell phone received a message, he looked down and said, do you really think I'm here to find her? The corners of Shuyi's mouth curled secretly, and he continued, then you let her get into another man's car. What's wrong? Shi Yan put away the phone, with a little pride in his eyes. Do you really think there is a little fool in our family? His niece is brilliant. Shuyi nodded sincerely, you don't even know what stupid things your little fool did today. Cut. Without warning, Qin Shiriwa sneezed in Yu's car. Do you need to turn on the air conditioner? Yu asked. Qin Shiriwa covered her mouth with a tissue, shook her head, looked at Yu, and nodded again. Yu flipped the air conditioner button casually, and soon, a gust of warm air blew out. Halfway through the journey, the two had almost no communication. Being blown by the warm wind, Qin Shiriwa couldn't sit still. She adjusted her sitting posture, turned her upper body half sideways, and her eyes drifted to Yu every now and then. Mr. Yu, I heard that your company is in the CBD. Yeah. Yu turned the steering wheel, turned around at the intersection, and looked out the window sideways. What's wrong? Qin Shiriwa nodded. Oh, let me just say that you look familiar to me, and I often work in the CBD, so we may have met. That may be seen before. Yu's tone was flat, but he would not let the topic end in the girl's mouth. Which company do you work in the CBD? Qin Shiriwa. She lowered her head and snapped her nails. IFC Mall. Oh, the department store industry. Qin Shiriwa. That's right, I can drive the GDP of the entire IFC by myself. Yu smiled. Sales champion. Qin Shiriwa. Consumption champion. After a long silence, Yu just smiled and didn't comment on Qin Shiriwa's words. 10 minutes later, the car stopped outside the gate of Botsuyun Bay. Ever since Qin Shiriwa returned to China, the family thought that she had grown up too, so they bought her a house here. But because Shi Yan also lives here, her house is empty most of the time. However, Qin Shiriwa sat in the co-pilot and did not move for a long time. Yu didn't urge her either, and tapped the steering wheel rhythmically with his fingers. Qin Shiriwa looked at him from the corner of his eye. Clearly know everything, but do nothing. It seems that he is not expected to take the initiative to add a WeChat. Qin Shiriwa took out her mobile phone and said, Mr. Yu, shall we add a WeChat account? Yu smiled and nodded, okay. After adding WeChat, Qin Shiriwa should leave anyway. But Yu's misty attitude made Qin Shiriwa restless. I couldn't figure out what he meant, and couldn't understand his attitude. It looks gentle and polite, but it also seems to reject people thousands of miles away. It is said that women chase men's interlayer, gauze, and Qin Shiriwa is an impatient person. She had been immersed in foreign countries for several years, and she didn't like playing with cats and mice, so when she got out of the car, she put her arms on the car door, half bent, and poked her head in. Those smiling eyes looked directly at Yu. Mr. Yu, do you have a girlfriend? Yu looked up and said flatly, no. Qin Shuriwei raised an eyebrow at him, then what do you think of me? Yu still smiled, you are fine. Qin Shuriwei thought to herself, it's more than half stable. Then next, she looked at Yu and couldn't help but smile at the corner of her mouth, revealing two small dimples. In fact, she has no experience in chasing men. When she was studying abroad, most of her classmates expressed their emotions directly, and they didn't even have the concept of chasing. Moreover, she heard from Shuyi that Yu had also traveled and studied abroad for many years. One side supported the other side, he should be more accepting of foreign ways. So, Qin Shuriwei ignored her blushing and said in a low voice, then, go to your house. After several days, Shuyi suddenly thought of Qin Shuriwei in the midst of his busy work rhythm. During her lunch break, she made herself coffee while texting her. Shuyi, by the way, I didn't ask you that day, Yu sent you home, and then what? Shuyi, did something happen? Qin Shuriwei, don't mention it. Shuyi, what's wrong? Qin Shuriwei, his family is too poor. Shuyi, huh? Shuyi feels that Yu's own conditions are already very good. His parents are in a high school and the dean of a second-level university college. The family's conditions are not even close to poor. Of course, if Qin Shuriwei insisted on matching each other, then Shuyi had nothing to say. But when Qin Shuriwei saw Yu for the first time, she knew about his situation. When Shuyi couldn't figure it out, Qin Shuriwei, do you know why his family is said to be poor? Qin Shuriwei, I felt that the atmosphere was up, so I asked him if he wanted to go to his house. Qin Shuriwei, he said that there is no door. Qin Shuriwei smiles. Shuyi, his fists were clenched unconsciously. Shuyi finally realized how Ruoshant felt when she saw her. She turned around and reported to Shi Yan. Shuyi, hurry up and take care of your niece. How does she chase people? She is so stupid. After a long time, the text sent by Shi Yan made Shuyi feel very dazzling. Shi Yan, then you teach her. Shuyi, Shi Yan, I think you are quite good at it. Literally, it is obviously a compliment. But from Shi Yan's mouth, no matter how it tastes, there is a strange smell of yin and yang. This coffee doesn't taste good anymore. At the end of the month, the visa arrived in Shuyi's hands as promised. It was the first time she went to the United States, and she was still alone. Shuyi felt more nervous than expected, and barely fell asleep the night before departure. During her short sleep, she also dreamed that she was lost in the United States, and was at a loss in an unfamiliar street, crying and holding her mobile phone, but she couldn't make a call. This dream caused Shuyi to be in a daze when he boarded the plane the next day, and fell asleep wearing a blindfold while sitting in his cabin. She didn't take off the blindfold until the flight was about to take off and the flight attendants began to conduct security checks. Shuyi rubbed his neck while adjusting the seatbelt. Inadvertently, she found that the woman sitting next to her looked a little familiar. Shuyi's ability to distinguish faces has always been relatively strong. After a few more glances, she was sure that this should be one of the many secretaries outside Shi Yan's office. When she came to a conclusion, the female secretary also smiled at her. Miss Xing, long time no see. Long time no see. Shuyi nodded with a smile, what a coincidence, I didn't expect us to be on a flight. The female secretary pursed her lips and smiled. Shuyi fell asleep on the plane, the female secretary woke her up to eat, and it was the female secretary who woke her up even to fill in the immigration card. Shuyi knew the English on the immigration card, but after all, it was the first time to go to the United States, and it was related to whether she could enter the country smoothly, so she was very cautious when filling it out. Instead, it was the female secretary next to her who filled it out with a brush. It looked like someone who often traveled to and from the United States. Shuyi, well, shall I take a look at your entry form? Let me see if I have written anything wrong. The female secretary smiled and said, let me fill it out for you. Shuyi, don't bother, I will do it myself. The female secretary gave Shuyi her immigration card. When comparing the information one by one, Shuyi said pleasantly, oh, we are in the same hotel. Are you also on a business trip? What a coincidence. The female secretary took a deep breath and nodded to her, yes, what a coincidence. Coincidentally, when she was sitting comfortably in the office, she suddenly received a notice asking her to go to the United States without doing anything, just stay with Shuyi and not let her get lost. Because of having a companion, Shuyi had a very good experience of coming to the United States for the first time. With her company, she did not encounter any situation, and entered the hotel smoothly all the way. Moreover, the female secretary studied at the university here, and she is very familiar with the local delicious food and fun. Shuyi would follow her around for fun whenever she was free. Looking at the daily updated photos of Shuy's circle of friends, those who know that she is on a business trip, but those who don't know think she is on vacation. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye, and Shuyi was still a little bit reluctant to leave. Shuyi, 555-5555. Shuyi, what kind of fairy sister is your secretary? It's a pity to be your secretary. You should be a tour guide. Shi Yan looked at the phone and sneered. The secretary with a monthly salary of 60,000 to 70,000 yuan made a special trip to act as a tour guide for her, and she didn't deserve it at all. Shi Yan, have a good time. Shuyi, what are you talking about? I'm here to work. Shi Yan looked out of the window. The clouds were thick, and the morning light could not be seen. Since Shuyi left, Jiangqing has been raining continuously for several days, and the weather is very humid every day, and there is no sign of spring at all. Time banquet, calligraphy. Shuyi, Shi Yan, I don't know how far Jiangqing is. Shuyi read these 2 sentences together, smiled slowly, shook his head and said to himself, the little feast of the Shi family looks through your eyes.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.